Tonight, the backlash against tax cuts, inside Chernobyl's steel dome, and Yemen's former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, was killed just outside Sana'a, the country's capital. Houthi officials say their fighters killed Saleh as he was trying to flee to Saudi Arabia. Since 2015, Saleh and his forces have been aligned with the Iranian-backed Houthis in a united front against the Saudi-led coalition and Yemen's government. But over the past week, there's been intense fighting between Saleh's forces and the Houthis. And on Saturday, Saleh changed sides, saying he was ready to turn a new page in his relationship with the Saudi-led coalition. The Supreme Court decided today it will allow the third version of the travel ban to take full effect while legal challenges make their way through the appellate courts. The ban, introduced in September, restricts travel from citizens of Chad, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, and certain government officials of Venezuela. The lower courts had said people from those countries with bona fide relationships should be allowed to enter, but today's decision overrules that. A Philadelphia judge has denied Meek Mill's bail request, saying he is a, quote, danger to the community. Last month, the rapper was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in state prison for violating his 2008 probation by riding a dirt bike in the street and being involved in a fistfight at an airport. Artists and athletes have rallied behind him, calling the sentence heavy-handed and Mill's nearly decade-long probation period unjust. Mill's attorney says the ruling continues a, quote, long pattern of unfair treatment, and they plan to appeal. Today, President Trump announced that 2 national monuments, Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante, will be redrawn, removing protection from about 2 million acres of Utah's desert. They were declared national monuments by former presidents Obama and Clinton under the Antiquities Act. That designation gave them the highest form of protection and prohibited resource extraction, including mining.
It means all of the public lands that we're so proud of as Americans are under threat by presidential action, which may determine that, well, we'd rather mine for uranium in this area. We'd rather drill for oil and gas. And it undermines the very fabric of America's public lands being owned by all Americans and protected in perpetuity for future generations.
Several groups have already threatened legal action against the decision, saying that once a site has been declared a national monument, only Congress can undo it. After weeks of tiptoeing, President Trump fully endorsed Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore today. Many Republicans have called for Moore to drop out of the race after allegations of sexual misconduct by multiple women, including 2 who say that Moore forced himself on them when they were teenagers and he was a prosecutor in his 30s. In a statement, Moore's campaign said, quote, President Trump called Judge Moore a fighter and wrapped up the call with a "Go get him, Roy." Earlier in the day, the president said Moore's vote was needed for things like his immigration and pro-life agenda.
President Trump's personal lawyer, John Dowd, is in the national spotlight today after outlining what may be a bold new legal strategy, saying that under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is the top law enforcement officer in the country and therefore cannot obstruct justice. But Sunday, it was John Dowd himself that drew new attention to the idea of the president obstructing justice when he claimed he was the real author of a Trump tweet that pointed to, well, the president possibly obstructing justice. This all raises a lot of questions, including, who is John Dowd? Dowd is legit. In the 80s, he brought down Pete Rose in the biggest sports gambling scandal in American history. He represented John McCain in the Keating 5 investigation, and in 2011 faced off against Preet Bharara in a famous insider trading case. But especially for a lawyer, he's also prone to ill-advised behavior and hasn't slowed down since becoming Trump's first line of defense. In August, just after the white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, he forwarded an email to journalists and government officials that said Black Lives Matter had been infiltrated by terrorist groups. In September, a New York Times reporter heard Dowd and White House lawyer Ty Cobb openly discussing legal strategy in the Russia investigation at an outdoor restaurant in Washington, D.C. And now, Dowd is going pretty far out on a legal limb to claim Trump is immune to obstruction of justice charges. But in claiming to have written Trump's tweet about Flynn, Dowd may have opened himself up to legal and ethical problems.
I find it truly breathtaking that an attorney with the reputation and experience of Dowd would ever let this type of statement be issued. But he was not just speaking on behalf of the president. For all intents and purposes, he was speaking as the president. Now, usually statements made by counsel on behalf of clients are treated as binding on the clients. That's why this could not be worse.
The other issue? He may have just made himself a witness in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, which means he could both be compelled to testify while trying to represent the President of the United States.
I think it'll become increasingly difficult for Dowd to remain counsel, particularly if the special counsel makes any inquiry into this tweet. Dowd has now put himself in the position of being a witness in the investigation of the special counsel. You can't perform both roles.
If nothing else, it's ironic that Donald Trump has written almost 37,000 tweets of varying degrees of outrage, but it's the one his lawyer claims to have written that could be the most damaging.
At the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, workers are tackling the final preparations for a major milestone, slated for next year, handing over full control of the site to Ukraine. Chernobyl is still considered the world's worst nuclear disaster, and the job of containing the fallout has required an international cast of players. A year ago, crews finished putting the new sarcophagus in place. It's a massive steel arch, officially called the new safe confinement, that covers the destroyed reactor. Now, workers are busy sealing up the space between the new sarcophagus and the old one, which was built in the 80s. And they're facing some of the highest levels of radiation they've encountered so far.
The town of Pripyat stands as a stark reminder of the danger inherent in nuclear power. 43,000 people lived here before the Soviet Union ordered a complete evacuation after the accident in 1986.
This was your seat?
Только он так стоял здесь, да.
Dima Popov was a student at the time.
Can you tell me about the day when the reactor exploded? What was that like?
Потому что, во-первых, люди не представляли в полной мере последствия, что может быть. Сказали после эвакуации, во время эвакуации, что возьмите с собой только вещи на 3 дня, там немножко там еды, и через 3 дня вы вернетесь обратно.
And how did you feel when you found out you couldn't come back to Pripyat to live?
Мне было 16 лет, но это воспринял это просто как приключение, наверное, что да. Ну, родители, наверное, понимали, но не верили до последнего, что не разрешат вернуться в город обратно.
Right after the disaster, it took Soviet workers 3 months to entomb the toxic remains of the destroyed reactor. That's what the original sarcophagus was for. It was a quick fix, but was never intended to be a long-term solution for decontamination. And as years passed, the structure showed increasing risk of collapse. The new safe confinement is the solution for the next 100 years.
So right now we're underneath this massive shell that has been built over the top of the reactor here in Chernobyl. Soon the operations will be taken from the international community that are working on it and given back to the Ukrainians.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine looked abroad for help cleaning up Chernobyl. 27 countries contributed funding for the design and construction of this massive project. It took 20 years, 1,200 workers, and $1.8 billion to complete. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is the primary donor and has coordinated work since the beginning. Simon Evans heads the Chernobyl Shelter Fund.
Why was it so important to build this structure now?
We needed some sort of solution that would be able to give us a safety and security and decommissioning over a very longer term period, and this is what we have now.
The new crane system is the centerpiece of the work that is about to start. It will carry the tools for taking apart the decaying sarcophagus and removing contaminated material for safe storage. but the confinement must be sealed completely before this hazardous process can begin. This work has been a priority over the past year.
The arch is designed to seal hermetically to the old structure, which isn't flexible.
How tall is it?
110 metres.
And how heavy?
36,000 tonnes. Biggest movable land-based object ever.
The confinement has reduced outside radiation levels by 90% since it was installed last November. But the steel roof alone cannot stop all contamination from escaping. Workers installed a powerful ventilation system designed to keep airborne particles inside. They also built 85-foot concrete walls to cover end sections of the old building.
We've got only 20 minutes for the roof. It's according to the rules of the Radiation Safety Department.
So some of the biggest challenges we had in the last year is sealing all the arch to the existing structures. So we have to have this very carefully developed polymer system. And that's the problem area at the moment for the dose rates we're encountering there. So currently the contractor has guys up there drilling, and when they drill a hole, they're 5 minutes a day.
What would have happened if none of this happened? If you hadn't put the shell on, you hadn't done all this work?
What was built after the accident was an absolute heroic effort, but it was never designed to last. And over time, it would collapse and massively contaminate this whole area. So we had to provide a long-term solution to slowly start taking the old reactor apart, and that's what we've provided.
But the job of cleaning up Chernobyl is even bigger than dealing with the contaminated material under the new safe confinement. When the Ukrainians take control, they will also have to deal with nuclear waste from 3 other reactors that were functioning at the time of the accident. 21,000 fuel rods from those reactors are currently housed in storage that was only designed to last 15 years. When work starts next year, the fuel rods will be transported here where they will be cut and packed for long-term storage. It's projected to take 8 to 10 years for all of the rods to complete the journey.
Now we're entering the main hot cell. This is the heart of the facility. This is where all the real technology and processing starts, with very radioactive fuel. And behind me is a very complicated, what's called a damaged fuel table. So you have specialist manipulators here. You have the ability to twist, to drill, to fix, to weld, to reconfigure. It's like an operating table for nuclear fuel.
Can I use it? This is nuts, mate. You can pick this up with these.
The centuries' worth of maintenance that the site will require underscores one thing about Chernobyl that hasn't changed. It's still a pillar of the region's economy. Denise Godovsky is training to be a crane operator at the confinement.
Это работа особенная, так же, как кран единственный в мире такой, аналогов ему нету. То есть я очень хотел сюда попасть. Работа на самом деле очень важная.
Jobs connected to the plant continue to be one of the only sources of income in the region, even if workers have to live farther away than they did 40 years ago. After the Soviet Union evacuated Pripyat, many of the residents went to Slavutij. Built from scratch outside the 30-kilometer exclusion zone, it became the new home for displaced workers. They've made the hour-long commute to maintain the plant for more than 3 decades. Denise is part of the new generation.
Бабушка у меня была инженером эксплуатации связи, а дед работал в операторском зале и до самого закрытия станции.
And how do you feel about the fact Ukraine is about to take over operations at Chernobyl? Do you think they're ready?
Я думаю, да. Будем на это рассчитывать, надеяться.
$479 pages were handed to us.
Late Friday night, Republicans raced to make good on decades of promises to rebuild the nation's tax code in the image of small government, social conservatism, and trickle-down principles. And by early Saturday morning, the Senate had passed a tax bill.
The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as amended, is passed.
The high-speed process left little time for lawmakers to even read the bill. let alone for their constituents to have a say in how they'll be taxed. Evan McMorris Santoro has more.
Representative James Comer had the dubious honor of being one of the few House Republicans we could find actually holding a town hall on the day he had to fly to Washington to vote for a tax bill he likes a lot but doesn't love.
The low-income, blue-collar people in this first district, by the estimates that I have been given, will not pay any federal tax.
Comer is a first-term congressman from a district that's not up for grabs in 2018. This is a Republican place. President Trump won it by over 60% in the last election. Comer won it by over 70%. But the chance to talk about the tax bill with a Republican congressman brought out what few angry progressives you can find around these parts.
Your patriarchy is visible. I represent Kentuckians.
There's a lot in this massive, hastily put together tax bill that people don't yet know about. And that makes them nervous. Especially because a lot of the stuff they have heard about, they don't like. Here's what has to happen now. Members of the House, members of the Senate have to meet to squash together their versions of the bill and create one that both houses of Congress can pass. It's called a conference committee and can make for very awkward politics. For example, the House version of the bill eliminates a popular tax deduction for medical expenses. The Senate version of the bill keeps it.
I'm going to try to see that the health care deduction gets put back in there.
If it doesn't get put back in there, will you vote for it?
Yeah. I will probably vote for the bill regardless.
There are a lot of things various Republicans wish were in the bill. A lot of things various Republicans wish weren't in the bill. But regardless of what's in or what isn't, most Republicans are going to vote for it anyway. Comer likes what this bill's trying to do.
That's what I think. The goal is to try to eliminate all the tax credits and then just lower the rates, drop the rates, and try to help everyone.
And there were people at this town hall who liked the bill too, as long as it keeps those big tax cuts for businesses.
I am a corporation. I'm a little guy. I would be considered a little mom and pop organization. If we can make a little bit more money, we can keep a little bit more of the money that we created and the jobs that we created. If those people can keep a little bit more of their money and not the government, then I'm fine with that.
But plenty of Republicans who aren't from places like this, whose districts aren't as secure as Comer's, are going to vote for this bill anyway, too. This tax bill is less popular than Obamacare when Obamacare passed. And Obamacare was not popular when it passed. It's also less popular than George W. Bush's first round of tax cuts. Not that popularity matters much in the current climate. What most Republicans are betting is that doing something, anything, is easier to run on than slowing things down to take care of some specific concerns of their constituents.
You know, history will determine whether this was a good bill or not. When 80% of the people in my district take the standard deduction, and we're doubling the standard deduction, there's no question 80% of the people in the district are getting a tax cut, period.
Lately, the tiny American island of Guam has been threatened with annihilation by Kim Jong-un. But it's already been overrun by a foreign enemy: brown tree snakes. The snakes likely arrived on the island on a cargo ship or military aircraft in the 1950s, and now outnumber people on Guam by 10 to 1. Every effort to eradicate the invasive species has so far failed. Vice News went on a night hunt with a biologist who's tracking down brown tree snakes one by one.
It's estimated here on Guam that there's anywhere between 1 to 2 million snakes. Guam has no native snakes, so the native animals had no way to react to such a predator. They didn't know what it was. So with no way to stop that snake, it just came in and spread over the entire island. So there are several species of birds that are no longer found here on Guam at all. All the ones that were here are gone. The forest just completely changed. All the native species are so much rarer now than they used to be. One One of the things that we look for when we're looking for snakes is our light reflecting off of their shiny scales. It can be really difficult right after a rain because everything's shiny. This one's going to be super easy to catch. Yoink. Here on Guam, nobody likes the brown tree snake. They eat their chickens, they eat small cats, so they're a real nuisance to people in their home life. They'll get in your house. There have been reports in the past of them coming up through the toilet, which is terrifying.
The goal of the USGS is to eradicate the brown tree snake. To do that, they need to understand how the snakes behave. After they catch them, they take them to a lab where they implant tracking devices inside each snake so they can study their movements. The data is then used for various methods of eradication, such as placement of traps and poison.
We're doing what we call morphing of these snakes. We're collecting data on their size, their weight, the gender of the snakes. So brown tree snakes are technically venomous. They're just not really any threat to someone my size or an adult person. A visual check for the male is just kind of roll and express, and that tube that pops out is a hemipene, so that indicates it's a male. These containers are what we're housing our snakes in for surgery. Right now, before surgery, they're in there, they've got a little water, they've got a place to hide so that they kind of can feel safe in this stressful environment. We're using isoflurane. It's an inhalable anesthetic. We'll put the snake's head in this end, and it's going to start inhaling that anesthesia. So when they're completely under, we'll have that amount of time, 15, 20 minutes, however long, to do the surgery. And so I'll go ahead and start with a small incision. And we'll take our transmitter and just slip it inside the body cavity. Just like that. So the transmitter itself is less than 5% of the snake's total body weight. It has to be small enough that it's not going to add a significant amount of weight to the snake itself. We're ending the surgery by putting in a few sutures and closing the incision at the transmitter site. We're going to move the snake over to the recovery area. So I'm going to put this tube in the glottis and give it a couple of breaths. And this helps get any leftover isoflurane anesthesia out and simulate a breathing response in the snake. We'll monitor it for a while to make sure it starts breathing on its own again, and then early next week we'll let it go back into the wild where it was caught, and we'll start our telemetry study tracking them out in the wild. So it's definitely working. And you can hear, like, as we get farther away, it gets quieter and quieter. The more that we know about these individuals, the easier it is to find control methods to help suppress them or eradicate them. I definitely think that we can get the snake population to a point where native species can be reintroduced.
That's Vice News Tonight for Monday, December 4th.